I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Today's episode, y'all, is going to be a topic that is near and dear to a lot of our hearts. It's something that I think many of us feel really passionate about, and that is schools, and especially nutrition and wellness and school food service, what's happening on our kids' plates. And so we're diving into this today. Of course, we know that solid nutrition, good nutrition is going to enhance all aspects of our kids' lives. So good nutrition we know is linked to better health, fewer sick days, better test scores, better attention, focus, class participation. All of these things are going to be tied to fueling our children well. And unfortunately with schools, there's a lot of barriers to that. So we're going to be talking through what is the landscape of nutrition requirements in schools, because it can be really confusing to even understand in the first place, to kind of wrap our heads around what's happening, what the issues are, and then also what can we do? What can we do as people who are just passionate about wellness? What can parents do? So we've got a lot that we'll be covering with you. And we are joined today by Emily Chatelain. She is the CEO and founder of School Food and Wellness Group, and that's a consulting firm that she started. They work with over 300 schools in 20 states across the country. She works with charter schools, traditional public schools, private schools, after-school programs. So she has a huge, broad view of what's happening in the landscape of food in schools, and essentially this bird's eye view of the challenges that are across the country. So welcome, Emily. I'm excited to have you with me.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk all things school food.
So you are so knowledgeable about so many different aspects of it. And not only are you knowledgeable about what policy and procedure is, you're also very passionate about wellness. So for me, it's the perfect mix to have someone like you in this role. So before we get into kind of the nitty gritty and the details of schools and nutrition and wellness, tell us, how did you 300 schools, that's a lot of schools in 20 states. And how did you get this started? Because you're just you, and you haven't been doing this for 50 years. It's not this giant company. It is a small consulting firm that has had a lot of success. So how did this happen?
Yeah, we've got, we maybe have 5 or 6 employees across the U.S. who are amazing at what they do. They're also really passionate. So it's really helped, grow what we're doing. But about 8 to 10 years ago, I finished grad school, and I was working for a back office company who did kind of finance and operations for charter schools. And I was tasked with this one school in particular who operated the National School Lunch Program. They served 80 to 90% free and reduced lunch students. It was a high school. And the leader and founder of that school, when I came in mid-year, he said, we're losing so much money on this program. I think they were like $40,000 in the hole. And he told me, if we can't, get this budget turned around, then we're not gonna offer meals next year. So to me, knowing, right, that these kids don't have food to bring if the school isn't providing it, that was not okay. So I kind of just dove into the meal program. I rebid it. I got better pricing. We, established some, better procedures and policies, and really kind of worked on the program and turned it around. And they did break even. I parted ways with that person in that school because that's against all of my philosophies. But what that did, other charter schools and schools in general have, it's a pretty small community, and, everyone talks, everyone knows one another. So other schools in the area kind of heard that we had, rebid everything and gotten better pricing. We had increased our participation. The food was better. So they kind of reached out and said, can you do for us what you did for this school? And fast forward, 8 years later, here we are now with 300 schools working across the U.S. And I think charter schools in particular, and even small school districts, they just don't fully understand this whole program, and they don't realize that they're essentially running a restaurant. You're running a business with this food program. So I think that's why there's such a need from administrators with help, because they've got a million other things on their plate, that learning this national school lunch program and how to run this efficiently really isn't something they can fit on their plate. So that's where we kind of come in, and schools have contracted out with us to basically just help them manage it.
Because it's an area that, even for me as a dietitian, I know the language, I can look at it, and it's complicated. It is really complicated to wrap your head around. And so not only is it's complicated, it's time consuming. And for them to say they're going to focus on it and do it well, it's taken time away from the other stuff that they do best, which is educating our kids, helping to raise our kids. So turning to a group like you is probably like a dream for them. Like, okay, y'all take it over. Y'all help us do better from a revenue perspective, and also help make sure we're following all these protocols.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I've got a registered dietitian who works for me. She lives in Los Angeles, and she was in corporate wellness before. And she kind of, said that she was missing like her purpose, right? That wasn't really fulfilling what she wanted to do. So she wanted to get into schools, and her mind has just been blown working with me and in our schools, and just learning the, intricate details of the program. So I think it's been really fun for her to kind of see the difference between corporate adult and, child nutrition schools.
Because that's where it starts. She's like, oh, this is why we ran into so many issues with our adults. Right. Okay. But really, you and I, separate from this podcast interview that you and I are doing right now, are working together on just some other projects, and some related to school food nutrition. And the first conversation that we had about one particular project, that my words at the end of it were, oh my gosh, this feels so hopeless, because we come in with these ideas and this and this and this, but it's so restrictive in some ways, and it's so very specific. And we'll talk money in a minute on this, but there's very few dollars to support it. There's not a lot of creativity often that is accessible. And I came away feeling like, how are we ever going to do this? And I think you're like, no, we've got this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it feels like a giant mountain.
Yeah, it can be really daunting and discouraging, but as you'll see, and you just have to wade through the red tape, the regulations, and just fight for what is right for these kids, and we can get there.
And so before we go into kind of for our listeners, what does this landscape look like? Because I think there's a lot of like myth that people say, oh, these things are served, or this is what you can and can't do. A lot of us don't really understand it. But before we get into that, I want to make sure to also, let our listeners know this is a really cool project, a different project that you are involved in, and it's your passion project. It's the nonprofit 3 O'Clock Project. You're executive director of this initiative.
Yes. So in the work that I've been doing, right? So 8 years ago, kind of jumped into the school food industry and started working with schools. What I love to do whenever I visit schools is I go sit in the cafeteria and I talk to the kids. And one school in particular, it's elementary school, I would always visit. And one day at lunch, they served blueberries. And I was sitting there talking with all the girls at the table, and none of them were touching their blueberries. And they were maybe second graders, first or second graders. And at some point I said, why aren't you eating these blueberries? Blueberries are so great. They're great, for you, all these things. And one of the little girls looked at me and just said, I don't know what that is. I've never seen that. And everybody else at the table kind of shook their head. And it really hit me that these kids don't even have access to fruit and vegetables and fresh items that I did growing up. And I just couldn't fathom a world where, a second grader, 7 or 8 year old had never seen or been served or eaten a blueberry. And it kind of made me realize how, lucky I was growing up, that having a meal at home on the table when I got home from school was never a worry for me. My pantry was always full. My refrigerator was always full, and my parents always had food on the table. And a lot of these kids in these schools don't have that safety net. They do worry, where is their food going to come from if they're not in school, after school or during the summer. So I kind of had the idea back then, and about 3 years ago, it became a reality. And we created the 3 o'clock project. The idea is that, when the bell rings at 3 o'clock, a lot of kids don't have food to go home to, or they have maybe unhealthy food. It's not the ideal dinner. So what we do is we deliver healthy supper and snacks to after-school programs throughout the state of Louisiana right now. We have plans to grow, but we deliver free meals that are healthy, whole grains, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables to after-school programs, tutoring programs, YMCAs, Boys and Girls Clubs. And our goal is to continue to grow and reach, every child who would have a need.
And it's already pretty giant. Last year in 2019, y'all served almost 300,000 free suppers and snacks.
Yeah. So we delivered, that was about 30 partners that we had last year. And the sky's the limit. All our communities have kids in need. So.
And you have some cool fundraising initiatives for that coming up too. So on our podcast episode notes, I'll have the link to not only Emily's school food and wellness group, the consulting group that works with schools for what we're going to be talking about with school lunches, but I'll also link to 3 o'clock project and some features about that to kind of, if you want to get involved or you want to help support Emily, because it's a very, very cool initiative. I'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, Billy Razors. They are an Allure Best of Beauty winner, and they are on Nylon's beauty hit list. Billy delivers premium razors direct to you for half the price of what you find in stores. Go to mybilly.com to get their starter kit, which includes 2 razor cartridges, a handle, and their magnetic shower holder. For only $9, you can get 4 refill blades every 1, 2, or 3 months. Shipping is always free, and you can skip, adjust, or cancel your subscription anytime. And to express a little love for our Fueled podcast, go to mybilly.com/fueled for 10% off your razor. This is a limited time special offer, so go now to save 10% off of your razor at mybilly.com/fueled. That's mybillie.com/fueled. Okay. So that's the fun stuff. Let's talk about the school lunch program, the National School Lunch Program. This is the requirements. Kind of help give us just a general overview of what that looks like as far as requirements and regulations and reimbursement to the school.
Right. So, in as much of a nutshell as I can make it, so most public schools and some private schools participate in the National School Lunch Program. It's a federally funded program, and it provides reimbursement for meals that you serve to students that meet the USDA, right, federal requirements. And so that looks like a meat or meat alternate, a fruit, a vegetable, a whole grain, and milk. So in order to get funded for the food that you're serving, right, you have to serve all these compliant meals. You have to, check and see which of your families qualify for free and reduced. And there's a bucket load of paperwork that comes with it. So schools who are in the program and, operating it correctly, they get on average nationally about $3.50 for a free lunch, and about $2 to $2.20 for a free breakfast. And that money is supposed to go towards food, labor, and like direct and indirect costs, right? So your, small wares, your equipment, your plates, your forks, your utensils, etc. And schools are reimbursed monthly based on the number of meals that they serve.
And so it's not how many kids are in the school, but it's how many meals are actually picked up by a child that through that month.
Correct.
So what I've kind of, heard the different, some of the feedback from food service vendors or from schools is that because of this, because they only get paid the $3.50 per lunch for lunches that are served, they want to do everything possible to make these meals as appealing to kids is really first priority, and unfortunately nutrition might be behind that, but or variety or all these things. So the other thing is, tell me how much, whenever you do the breakdown and you're looking at, okay, $3.50 is what they're reimbursed for a lunch, which you think, okay, for $3.50, I could go to the grocery store and I could buy a decent bit and cobble together a healthy lunch and get some variety that would rotate. But it's not, like you said, that includes everything that's going into preparing the food. How much of that $3.50 is actually on average available for just ingredients for the food itself?
Right. When you break it down, you have about $1.25 for a lunch to spend on food.
And what is it for a breakfast?
I'd say it's about $1, so it's about half.
So when we think about in the store, that $1.25 suddenly doesn't get us so far for lunch, even if we're buying whole real food ingredients and divvying it up of how much can we make. That's really makes it a challenge for quality ingredients, and so then schools are looking to see, where can I save on ingredients? So they're buying things that are lesser quality, but also where can I save on time and labor? And that's where all these heavily processed foods come into, because they don't have to have, a skilled chef or cook who's been trained to prepare it. It's open the bag, heat and serve.
Absolutely.
So that's where, when we talk about it, why you can understand. After I talked with Emily the first time, and we're even talking like more logistics, I'm like, oh my gosh, where do we even start with this? So, giving us the landscape of school lunches and kind of where things are. How have the regulations changed lately in the past year or two? But before we talk about that, help us to kind of understand, like, I guess, a global view. I think the first that we really started hearing about specifics about the school lunch program was with Michelle Obama's Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act back in 2010. So what was the landscape before that? And then how did this change with Michelle Obama in 2010? And since then, how has it changed?
Yeah, so, it was a great initiative, right? Michelle Obama, when that administration came into office, she took that as one of her passion projects. Which was fantastic, because I don't think anyone has really looked at it before, since it had began originally back for World War II, which is a whole nother discussion. But fun fact, right? The National School Lunch Program was implemented because our soldiers weren't getting enough nutrition in school. So that's where it all started. And then Michelle Obama came along and said, wow, nothing's changed since World War II.
Right.
We should
is
change
insane.
This. Yes.
Yeah.
So she developed these kind of reauthorized, and actually created standards based on grade level, gave like minimum and maximum calorie, sodium, so much fruit a day, vegetable a day, and kind of revamped it, if you will, to give schools more guidance on what does a healthy meal look like. Because before, it's kind of up in the air and up to each school, and there wasn't just a whole lot of guidance and direction. So Michelle Obama's team said, okay, he stamped it. This is what healthy is to us, right? And this is what you should follow. So that happened, and schools now, and again, right, it's federally funded. So it's like, if you want the money, you have to follow the rules. So schools were kind of thrown into these new regs, these new requirements, and having to, really have some dietitian skills there to measure out, like, and know what a recipe and how to do all this. So I think from then to now, when I entered the landscape in 2012, right, this had just kind of been introduced, and schools were reeling, kids were reeling, because, gone was their, free salt shaker on the table, right, lunch. And all of a sudden, they are now eating brown rice and whole grain pasta, and they're being forced to take vegetables and fruit. So you saw a ton of waste and pushback in the beginning, because, everybody hates change, right? Or most people. And so not only were the kids revolting, saying, I mean, what is this crap on my plate? This isn't what I used to eat. But you also had like cafeteria workers and directors who all of a sudden had to change all their recipes and meet these new, requirements. And so I think it started the trend of convenience food, because now it's just how do we meet these regs and keep it easy and just buy some, pre-made stuff that we know meets the regs. And that's kind of where I think it's led us to this point.
And I can understand from the cafeteria staff's perspective, because, if you have that, and like you said, people often are resistant to change. It's uncomfortable. And especially when that change is put in place without a whole lot around it to educate on how to make foods taste better. And they went from serving good old comfort foods and kids were gobbling it up, or, at least it may not have been nutritious, but it was stuff that they knew that the kids liked. And they were kind of like, now, flip the switch to a year later or whatever it was. And then the kids are revolting. And I'm sure a lot of them might have taken it personally, or they felt like, what can I do? And, now my food is getting complaints. It used to not. And then there becomes a lot of resistance around that. I just had pop in my head. And this is, if you haven't seen it, I'm actually going to put the link on this for our podcast episode notes for anyone who's listening and just wants a dose of humor. Saturday Night Live years ago, Chris Farley was on Saturday Night Live. Have you seen his lunch lady skit with Adam Sandler?
Yes.
Okay. That is what I just pictured. So those of you listening who know Chris Farley.
Sloppy Joes.
Sloppy Joes. And he's got his lunch lady outfit on, and he's dancing around and jamming out and singing about Sloppy Joes and hoagies and cornbread and navy beans. I'm crying every time I do it, because the little bit of work that I've done with schools and food and nutrition, I feel like that. And I can only imagine that is like, when you're watching it, you're like, you totally get it. But for anybody listening, it's just a hilarious Saturday Night Live skit, but it's about the lunch lady. And of course, Adam Sandler's hilarious. Chris Farley was hilarious. So I'll put the link to that. Yeah. But so I'm picturing it, and he twirls around as he's like dancing and singing. So I'm picturing all the lunch ladies when this came through were like twirling, and like, this is like an uprising. And so over years, though, it kind of settles down. People get a little bit more into their routine. I'm sure the cafeteria staff kind of falls into a routine because they have to. The kids get used to it because new kids coming into the school, that's just what they know. And
right.
So 2010, a little bit of an uprising over the first couple of years, and then it kind of settles into, it's just what the norm is. It always seemed like there was a little bit of friction around it. But then in 2018, what changed?
So, we had new administration come in. And again, right, federally funded. So this whole program is kind of controlled by the USDA. And so they came in, and Donald Trump's team rolled out new regulations. And now we haven't seen anything, right, change from when Michelle Obama first proposed all this in 2010. So 8 years go by, new admin come in, and they have relaxed the sodium limits. So they gave schools more time to comply with the reduced levels, because it was on a track to keep, lower and lower sodium. So they halted that.
Also point out that the target for these sodium levels is not low. It's still over 1,000 for lunches.
Right.
So
currently.
It's not like, oh my gosh, like we're asking schools to do something just incredibly, like really drastic. It's still in the 1,200 to 1,400 milligrams sodium, which is 2,300 is the upper limit. So to say we're relaxing and making that, giving them more time to get there, it's not a crazy low target.
Right. So they rolled that out, and they said that whole grains, now only half of your whole grains in a week need to meet that requirement. So whereas before it was every grain served during the week needed to be whole grain, and now they're saying half of the grains need to meet.
So the thing to point out too is and this is always frustrating to me, something will be called whole grain on the school lunch, like, whole grain waffle or whole grain, whatever, biscuit. But the requirement in order for it to be called whole grain is that it's only 51% whole grain. And so it's that, which means 49% can be white flour. So food makers know this, food manufacturers know this. So kind of squeak into the limit for most of them. So it's a blend of almost 50-50 whole grain and white flour. But when it's just that little smidge more whole grain, it gets to be called a whole grain waffle, pancake, whatever it is, and then put on the menu, and it complies with the whole grain requirement of a school lunch program, which I wasn't happy with that. But now with this new change, that's even less, and cut in half, that those halvesies of whole grains are now only half the time, and then the all white can be for the other half. One thing though that I do, so nutritionally, I'm like, well, that's, it is better than all white, of course, to kind of do the 50-50 blend or 51-49 blend. But one benefit I see, and this is something that, like, when I'm working with parents talking about their kids' nutrition or picky eaters or stuff, and going from a pure white refined product to a whole grain, something that's going to be more of a grainy texture, can be a big leap. And so at least if you're doing that halvesies, of a blend of whole grain and white, the palate is more palatable maybe for the kids. But also what I like is that it's at least darker in color. And so, yes, we know that might be almost half white flour, but at least if that bread looks brown, if that waffle looks brown, that, pasta looks brown, at the very least, we're adjusting kids to a different appearance in foods that are at least healthier foods. So if nothing else, we're getting that familiarity like up on those foods.
Right.
So,
I think that these changes in 2018, I think you would be surprised to learn who's pushing for it. Who's pushing for it are the School Nutrition Association and the cafeteria workers, because they're fighting against kids who aren't eating their food, right? They want to serve, like you said in the beginning, the reimbursement is tied with, the exact number of meals that you serve. So if they can put more salt in their foods, then more kids might eat it in their brain, right? And if they can reduce the whole grain, maybe more kids will eat that. But I think all of that goes back to the issue that I have with these original, rolled out in 2010. There was no funding put towards nutrition education, right? So with change, knowledge is power. So if we would have educated parents and kids and even staff, right, the cafeteria workers themselves, why is this happening? Why is this better than what you were doing? I think this would have been a lot more open to all these changes, because in 2020, there's even more changes coming down the line. And I think it, again, goes back to, we're not looking at the real root of these problems. I think that having lower sodium, is a positive, right? And that having more whole grains is a positive. But I see why they rolled them back, because they're getting such pushback in their cafeterias and they have so much waste. Well, in 2020, those new regulations that are being proposed, they haven't been implemented. They are proposing to cut the amount of fruit that is required at breakfast to half a cup from a cup. So it used to be, or right now, right, you have to offer kids a full cup. They have to take at least half a cup. So a lot of fruit is going to waste. And another change is that they want to allow potatoes to be offered as a vegetable every day. Right now, starchy vegetable just needs to be offered once a week. So again,
both of those break my heart.
I know. And the critics, right? And I'm sure you're a critic of this, is why? Like, why are we've come so far in 10 years. Why are we rolling this back? Why are we taking away more fruit? Why are we bringing in more starch? And I think we wouldn't have to be here if we could just spend more money on educating kids, put a dietitian in every school, tell these kids, why is it important to eat fruit for breakfast? And why should you maybe not eat potatoes every single day? Once in a while is fine. So, it's those things that are really disappointing to see.
I agree. And also, having things that are, different ways for kids to try these, like the blueberry example. The blueberries are actually something that we've run into a lot. It's surprising I think to a person who thinks, well, yeah, it's blueberries, it can be surprising just how many people have never seen one, tasted one, and it's completely unfamiliar. We actually we've done some work with the food pantry here in New Orleans, the Second Harvest Food Bank. And one of the things they struggled with the most for people to take away, and, this is the food pantry. So they're going and you have your selection of things and it's free. And it was like 5-pound bags of blueberries, which we know how much that would cost at the store. We're like, oh my gosh, that's 5 pounds of berries. And they could not literally give these away. And they realized that there was a lack of familiarity. So, okay, so let's start, on the main pickup days when clients are coming to the pantry, let's have smoothies blended. So, and a very simple one, but that way they can taste it and see, what it tastes like. Open a bag of them, let them thaw, let them even just have a fresh blueberry out of there and taste it. And so introducing just that, it's that familiarity and introducing them to it, talking about the nutritional benefits, but also letting them taste it and encouraging them to, instead of it's just passively on the plate, having something that's more interactive where they're they're able to taste it or try it in one or a couple of different ways. But yeah, the proposed changes, the 2018, 2020 changes are, really backsliding nutritionally, and that's unfortunate. And so then we look at that and we're like, well, this is all not good. And, we know that there's a lot of challenges, and we know that what was in place before wasn't perfect. There was a lot of backlash about it. But some of the challenges are like, I guess, walk us through the challenges of where, why is this such a struggle? Because it is hard for, I think, the outside person to understand from the school's perspective. And it's really easy for parents to just get very indignant with their schools. Well, why don't you do this? Or you should serve these things. So what are some of the challenges they face? And then let's talk about some of the stuff what we can do and what schools can do that's in their control.
Yeah. So I think everything goes back to money, right? It all starts with the funding. So the first challenge is that schools are only getting, that reimbursement and or if a child doesn't qualify, then the parent has to pay. We haven't touched on that, but right, there's this whole movement about lunch shaming, and it's creating kind of this environment where parents just think they don't have to pay now when they should. So schools already have limited funding. They may or may not be collecting money from paid students. And so any parent that doesn't pay their bill, that should pay their bill, is really just hurting, right, the school. So their funding is a big challenge. Other challenges for school cafeterias and workers, we have a lot of outdated kitchens, right? Kitchen equipment is expensive. It's just like any restaurant. I'd say to fully outfit a brand new school kitchen is about $100,000 or more. And a lot of that equipment, like a single piece of equipment, can be very expensive. So you have outdated kitchens and already a limited budget. And then if you don't have the right equipment to cook, then there won't ever be cooking in schools, right? So there's lack of cooking equipment and lack of skilled labor. So you have what you mentioned earlier, a lot of just heat and serve. You've just got ovens and warmers and freezers and refrigerators. And that's kind of what I'm now just seeing in schools, is a warming kitchen, if you will. And then if you walk into a kitchen, and most of these schools that, are outdated and they don't have the right equipment, you can't even find a knife. It's just cafeteria workers. There's no longer are they really called cooks or chefs because there's just a lack of skilled labor. And then another one that's more so on the school, I'd say, is limited time to eat. You've got schools that have 20 minutes or less for students to get all the way through a line, go sit down and eat. So you have kitchens that are stressed out. They have to create food that's easy to grab and go.
We've been in schools when the bell rings, and watch out because they are running. Like it is, they're in a full sprint to the cafeteria.
And then the bell rings for them to go back, and you see them throw out half their food.
Right.
Because they only sat down, 10 minutes ago. And then what you'll see is that kids eat the unhealthiest thing first, right? They're going to eat the chicken nuggets and ignore the side of vegetables because they don't have the time necessarily to even get to the vegetables. It's just wild. My son is in kindergarten this year and they have 20 minutes to eat, but they really only have 15 by the time they, little kindergartners make it down there and sit.
Right.
And
At best,
that
right?
is, yeah, he comes home every day. Now I send his lunch because I have a whole beef with the kitchen, go figure. But he comes home every day with half his lunchbox untouched. And I say every day, buddy, why didn't you eat it? And he says, I didn't have time. And he didn't, he simply didn't have the time to eat his carrots or whatever I put in. So then, I make him eat whatever it was that he didn't eat. But that's a big problem in our schools right now too, is the time. So you have kitchens that are serving processed, quick, convenient foods to get kids through the line and to eat.
And even you as a parent, or you're struggling with this at your own school.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely right. One side of the coin, you've got,
and
you
we should also
understand
say
now,
that,
right?
I don't think you'll mind me sharing, but you live in Colorado. And so a lot of the work in the schools that we've talked about are based in Louisiana, but I think people have in their head that everything's healthy in Colorado, and that even in a Colorado school, even a parent who does what you do for a living, and that school can still be a giant challenge for the meals.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of the first things I did. Obviously I'm like, oh, is it a good school? The curriculum, great. Show me the menu.
Right.
And I'm looking at this menu and I'm circling, well, that's processed, that's frozen, this. And and it was, by the time I was done, it was like the whole menu. And so now I don't want him to eat there. I'd rather send my lunch, which, is a bummer. I want him to enjoy and eat at school.
Right. Right. Do a lot of the other kids in his class bring their lunch too?
Yep. I'd say like half, and there's about 100 kindergartners. I'd say more than half bring a lunchbox because I go and I sit with them, and I watch.
Do you think the half that are bringing their lunch, do you think those parents are packing the lunch because they want their kids to have a more nutritious lunch than what the school offers, or because the kids don't like the food that's at the school?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's the kids, you have some parents who maybe are like me and say, I want to make sure he eats something nutritious and that, I know all the ingredients that went into it. Right. And then I think you have other parents who just have maybe a picky kid. And so they only eat like 5 things. And so that's why they send the lunch. But there's a lot of lack of parent education too. The other day I saw a kid open his lunchbox and he had like 2 bags of chips, a bag of crackers, a Gatorade, and a string cheese.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And I flagged attendant and I was like, this isn't okay. Like, that's not okay. Somebody should, tell mom that's not a lunch. Not me. I don't want to do it. Parenting is tough, but that is not, not a lunch. And that parent, who knows their story, but schools can be doing a better job too, right? Of what is healthy? What is our definition as a school of healthy?
Right.
And can we, we should involve parents and students and staff and,
What did they say when you said that to the staff there?
They agreed. They were like, oh, that's not. And they said, we're going to tell his teacher and they'll tell our parent. Who knows if that happens? There's just me meddling over there.
Right.
So.
No, I would be the same. And I think that that's a great way to do it. So some of the things that schools can do, that many of them, things that you're seeing schools already starting to do, or things that are, while it is so, seemingly hopeless, there's a lot that they can start to take control of in other aspects or in educational spaces that they can bring awareness to nutrition and food for kids. So what are some things that they're doing?
Yeah. So I think there's two sides of it, right? What are some schools doing? What can parents do? I am actually seeing really neat stuff that schools are doing. Now it's schools who, admit that nutrition should be important and they are willing to dedicate some time, resource, and money to that. And so I'm seeing local farm partnerships, field trips out to farms, school gardens, nutrition education. There's so many grants out there that schools can apply for that a lot don't know about. And we post grants, we do a monthly newsletter and we send out our grants, but Whole Foods does a salad bar grant. So you can go onto Whole Foods website and apply for $3,000 to buy a salad bar for your school.
Mm-hmm.
And there's school garden grants and all kinds of grants out there that exist that if they want to, right, schools can apply for, get additional funding, and do some of these neat programs. I mean, there's a school in New Orleans that is a client of ours, and their founder, kind of said from the beginning, nutrition's important to me. I want to make sure my kids are fed and fed, well. And so they're building a brand new facility, putting in a full cooking kitchen and a side testing kitchen, and they're going to actually have a culinary class to teach these kids like culinary skills.
Very cool. Yeah.
Super cool. So all of this to say it can be done, right? If you care about it and you put it as a priority, you absolutely can have a wonderful school meal program with scratch cooking and good employees and staff who really care. Now, what parents can do, I would say the first thing you should do as a parent, as an aunt, as an uncle, as a neighbor who has kids in your neighborhood and, you're friends with those parents, show up at school, go and sit and eat lunch with your child and just watch the habits of the cafeteria, of other kids. What are they doing? Are they in long lines? Are they eating? What kind of food are they eating? Are they eating their vegetables on their plate? Are they throwing it away? And educate yourself, number one, on what's going on in your school's cafeteria. Then number two, advocate, right? Kids can't always advocate for themselves. So parents are their best advocator. So get together, talk to other parents, bring this up at your PTO meeting, figure out what can we do to help our school improve our meal program. Don't think of it as it's us versus them. We just went through all of these challenges that schools have. So now right, what are their challenges? Well, how can we, fight those challenges? Do we need a fundraise? Can we bring in maybe one of the parents as a dietitian and they're willing to come volunteer? There's a lot of ways that parents can get involved, but it's really hard if it's just one parent.
That's what I was just going to say, because then it's the eye roll. Oh, that's that crazy parent. But when you have 20 or 30 or more parents coming together as a group, that's key. And so I think finding that network of other parents who are passionate about it and coming together as a cohesive group to the school. We have, there's a school here in New Orleans, and it is a private school. It's not a charter school. It's not a public school. It is a private school. It's a private school in an affluent neighborhood, and the food there is terrible. And we've tried to work with them to incorporate healthier options with the food service vendor there, who also is willing to do that. And the, priest / head of the school said, we don't care about nutrition. We want kids to come into the cafeteria and eat the food first and foremost. And we don't care if it's nutritious or not. And I was like, the parents at that school, I know many of those parents, and I know that they are truly rabidly passionate about wellness, but apparently they haven't come together as a cohesive unit. He doesn't realize that is a large want.
Right. He's just hearing a small voice, right?
Right. Or just hearing from from one or some parents, or hearing just from the kids. But, and that was something that I thought, wow, you would think on paper that would be a really easy change to bring into that particular school. And even in that particular school, with all these things set up around it that you would think would be support systems, it was a flat no. And so, not thinking that it's impossible, and bringing together those. And, if you're super passionate about it as a parent and that there's others, start pulling that together, whether it's monthly meetings about it, and make it an organized thing so that you aren't the one crazy parent. You've got backup and you've got power in numbers.
Yeah. It's so funny because I've actually worked with friends of mine, almost the same story, but in Baton Rouge with a school system that, was doing a lot. They're doing a lot of processed foods. They were starting to serve slushies and calling it fruit.
Oh, gosh.
Just crazy that, we have tomato sauce on our pizza. That's a vegetable, things like that really they're bending the rules of the National School Lunch Program. And it was the most incredible meeting I've ever been a part of. It was about 10 parents that came together, took time out of their day to come and sit with me and say, give us some tools, Emily, to help us go to our school and say, we're not happy. And we did. And it was really neat to see, parents who are passionate. And I mean, parents are freaking powerful. You get enough of them together and they really can make a change. But I think that's where you have to start is, like I said, go visit your cafeteria, invite your parent friends to come and sit. And then, just grassroot it, right? Start meetings, start asking for meetings with the principal and the school director. Show them that you see it, you notice this, and that you want to change. And if enough people come together, you can create change.
Couldn't say it better. Yeah. So instead of complaining about it, and I can be guilty of this too, but it's easy to gripe or roll our eyes about something, but if that's all we do and that's all anyone does, then it's not going to change. And so really kind of coming to see what can we do to start to bring that change ourselves. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what's happening in schools, what schools can do to bring change about, what parents can do to advocate for their children to the schools. What about what's happening in our own homes? Because that's truly where we have the most control. So messaging around food with kids, conversations about food with kids that makes it fun. What are some of the things that you do personally or you recommend?
Yeah, so it's tough because, a lot of parents may not have the means, right, to do a lot of these things. And, they say that in order for a child to start eating a new food, they need to be introduced or try it or see it at least 10 times. And that can be frustrating as a parent. So my advice is don't give up, show and lead by example, right? Start, have a salad or have a vegetable every night. I think I have a lot of friends who maybe their kid only eats one thing. So it's like at dinner, oh, here's the mac and cheese. Well, kind of mimic the meal pattern, put down a plate with a lot of things on it, right? So have a grain, have a protein, have a fruit, a vegetable, and start to show your kids what a complete meal looks like, and eat it yourself, right? Should lead by example. So if they see you eating that same item over and over and over, they're more likely to try it, and experiment. If you have the means, that is what I would suggest. And always talk about food in a positive way. Don't use some of those trigger words, right? Like, oh, that'll make you fat, or we never talk like that in my house. We just talk about healthy.
Or if dad doesn't like broccoli and he's like, oh my God, I hate that. Well, that's immediately right.
Right. Tell dad to grow up.
Right. Be quiet if you don't like it. Stay quiet about it. Right.
And try it. It's good for you. Maybe dad will, or cook it a different way. Another fun thing is to get your kids to help make dinner. We got my son, he's 5, but he has a little knife set with a finger guard, and he helps me like put the chopped vegetables into the bowl. And if they're a part of what you're cooking, they're more likely to eat it. Or another good one is if you like plan out dinners for the week. So like Sundays, like make it a family event. Go to the grocery store, write out your menu. What are we going to make this week? Let's go get the supplies. Any way to make your kid feel empowered, like they actually do have a choice or a say, they're more likely to, start developing those good habits and eating better.
And, something my dad was a very, as a kid, he was like, to me, nutrition was very important to him. And that's, he was probably the key reason that I even, grew up with the passion for like nutrition that I did and, went into this field. But nutrition was a conversation that we always had at the table. He would tell me, and as a kid, I would also be like rolling my eyes and I didn't always want to eat these things. And, it's not like it was like this perfect harmonious thing. Like I was like, I don't want to eat any more red beans, but then like, we would do like little taste tests on things or like, if you did something like if you have, here in the South, a lot of people do red beans at least once a week or whatever. Well, we would try things like, and people like hot sauce on their red beans. So, let's try some with a dash of Tabasco, or let's try a dash of this one or a dash of this one, or, having one or two different things that are done to something. If you've got a batch of whatever it is, take half to the side and do something differently. Hey, let's do a taste test. Let's see which one we like best. So you're really kind of bringing a little bit of a game into it. And it doesn't have to be anything that takes a ton of time at all. It could truly be that, if you had some sort of whole grain pasta or the Banza chickpea pasta we've talked about on this podcast before, if you have that, then you're doing, you have it with your red sauce, your marinara pasta sauce, and then you did half of it, just a little bit of olive oil and whatever. But there's just little stuff that you can do, and, which do we like better? And it doesn't have to be a big change. It could be even a seasoning or something without one ingredient, and can we tell a difference, or whatever it is. It could even be something like, if you're doing a recipe that calls for X amount of, let's just say, salt, and you're like, usually put a tablespoon of salt. Well, then, making some with half of it, and can we tell a difference? Just engaging kids in conversations about food and which one do we like better? Do we like it with this or this? And so they're also paying attention to the sensory characteristics and stuff like that beyond just trudging through eating a vegetable. They're like,
right.
Having a little bit more about the fun of it, and then talking about the nutrition behind it, and things that kids care about. Kids want things that it's going to help them feel good, perform better and stuff like that. I've had parents, when they come to me for their kids' nutrition, I had one parent, I remember, she was like, well, you tell him, right? About her 8-year-old son. He's going to be a better baseball player if he eats his broccoli. And I'm like, I remember I looked at the mom, I'm like, I can't say that,
Yeah, I can't promise that. Right.
Right. And I was like,
baseball. Who knows?
I kind of dodged that one. I was like,
Right.
that's a bit of a stretch, but parents, whatever it takes, but,
Right.
but yeah, so just having those conversations about it. And if there's a new product that you're bringing into the house or something like that, kind of making a fun game around it, having people try it. And it's kind of making a little test. All right. Well, Emily, there's so much. And I know we could talk about this forever, but parents, that's kind of your landscape of schools and what's happening currently, what's coming up that maybe isn't even as good as what's happening currently, but then also, the call to action to be actively engaged as much as possible and as much as you care to be, and getting those around you too as well. And I will have the links that Emily mentioned to her company and also to her nonprofit. We'll have those in the show notes, and the hilarious Chris Farley Saturday Night Live Lunch Lady episode. And Emily, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been super fun, and hopefully this inspires a parent to go eat lunch with their kids.
Agreed. All right. Well, thanks for listening, y'all. I am Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. And if you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And you can join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.